Hello, Canucks fans. Welcome back to another episode of Canucks Conversation, brought to you by Bet365. My name is Dave Quadrelli. I'm joined by Harmon Dial. Our technical producer is Jacob Lazar. He is the man at the controls, and he's also the co-host, partial co-host for today's show, because we're going to be talking about Hart Levine from PuckPedia. And when I say we, I mean Jacob and Harmon, because we had to pre-record this interview, so it's going to play later in the show, but Jacob and Harm co-hosting together. Now, I've co-hosted with Jacob. Is that your first time just hosting with just you and Jacob? And how'd it go?
It went well. I was hoping Jacob would be able to handle the hosting in terms of the introing Hart in and closing it out with the final Bet365 segment, just because I'm not used to doing it as much. And to put a producer on the spot like that is a test, and Jacob passed with flying colors.
Thank you for the kind words. Thank you.
How'd it go?
That was great. I had a couple good questions for Hart. Harm carried the rest, as I knew he would. And yeah, for anyone tuning in right now, stick around for the interview. There's some very interesting tidbits and a lot of things and a lot of discussion points that we're going to be able to have between now and the start of the season about how these changes are going to impact the Vancouver Canucks.
Yeah, and of course, stuff that will, the new CBA.
Yeah, and stuff that will specifically impact the Canucks. Yeah, one of the significant ones being that it's not just a playoff cap system, which we talked about with Hart as well, but also no more paper transactions. Like, that rule is kicking in this season, and we know how much the Canucks tried to take advantage of that with the AHL affiliate being right in Abbotsford. So spoke a lot about that, the implications, how it affects the Canucks, and just the overall trade market, and a little bit of Roslovic talk even. So that was a really fun conversation.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong. A couple things I want to get to here quick. But the paper transaction rule, the Canucks are going to be one of the only teams that still get to benefit from running guys up and down, because the new rule, for those that don't know, is that if you send a guy down, he's got to play a game. So the Canucks are actually going to be able to still do this. It's not going to be just you're down for an off day, you're back the next day. They're not going to be able to do that, but they are going to be able to send a guy down, have him play a game in Abbotsford, and bring him back up if they wanted to.
Practically, that's too much of a headache.
Yeah,
because then you're disrupting your AHL lineup and the player itself. Imagine you're playing one game in Vancouver, one game in Abbotsford, 2 games in Vancouver, 1 in Abbotsford. There's just no rhythm to that. Practically.
Oh, and I mean, also let's also not forget that drive. We all know what the drive is from downtown Vancouver to Abbotsford. It's not as quick as people think. Also, my gain is high apparently, whatever that means. That better, Jacob? I think so.
It's pretty quiet, but I can adjust you up now.
I got it. I got my own little thing here.
Oh,
how's that?
Too much. That's a little too much. Somewhere in the middle.
Okay, I think I found it.
A little quiet again.
I was at UBC today. Jacob, crank me up. I'm done doing this myself.
Yeah, you're good. I've got you fixed now on my end.
Attaboy, thank you. So I was at UBC today, which is why I wasn't part of the Hart interview. I'm going to be really excited to listen to that. But I was out at UBC because the Canucks were back out at UBC. I wrote about it over at CanucksArmy.com. People should definitely go read it. But I basically tried to make a list of all the players I saw. So I might be missing someone. I lost my glasses. But anyways, I might be missing someone, but this is the list I had. Elias Pettersson, both of them. Brock Besser, Evander Kane, Vitaly Kravtsov, Jonathan Lekermacki, Marcus Pettersson, Kirill Kudryavtsev, Nikita Tolopilo, Arshdeep Bains, Kevin Lankinen, Thatcher Demko, Tom Melander, Vilmar Olofsson, Derek Forbert, Philip Hronik, and P.O. Joseph. Now, again, don't ask me, what did you see on the mic, or on the, see my mic's on my mind. Don't ask me about what I saw on the ice. They've skated back and forth. They were doing like rush drills. It was very like, okay, let's get ready for training camp, which is in 2 weeks. And it was very much so a first skate back. So it was really just nice to see everybody's faces again and see everybody back on the ice. No Quinn Hughes, who's going to be a big topic of conversation in anyone else, and really kind of ties into our conversation about the new CBA. But I did get a chance to talk to Evander Kane after the on-ice session. He's a fun guy to talk to. Honestly, he had some really good things to say just about his overall impression of the group. Obviously, he knows Vancouver, so he's excited to go out for lunches and dinners with guys, because we've talked about this before, but they're getting here quite early. It's been a regular thing for them to get here early, but the big thing is that the Jake Milford is now earlier than it normally is. So they have to be here earlier. Like sometimes there'd be a few stragglers that come a few days before training camp. The Jake is a full week and a half before training camp actually starts. So these guys are going to get a long runway to be together before the season starts. And again, that's a really interesting thing, I think, to note. So Kane talked about that, talked about the forward group. It's all in the article, but yeah, good conversation with Evander Kane today.
That's sweet. And he's going to be, that Kane, how much pride he carries about being from this area. And even just anecdotally, I'm from the South Van area. So many people ran into Evander when he was, growing up here. That he's got a lot of friends and family here that he wants to make a good impression on. And he's really only got one season to make the most of it, not to mention the millions of dollars that are on the line with this being a contract year. That internally he's going to be feeling that, I don't know if pressures is the right word necessarily, but it's going to be very, very highly motivated to make sure that not only for him personally, but for the team as a whole, that it's a successful chapter in his career, because that could end up being the lasting impression for him in his hometown. And I know that Vancouver means a lot to him. I've chatted with him in the past. This didn't end up becoming a story, but I spent a while talking to a bunch of players around the league about the tattoos they have and the stories behind them. And he's got a lot of ink dedicated to Vancouver area related things. I think he's got the mountains. I think he's got a tattoo dedicated to what avenue he grew up on. Like, Vancouver means a lot to him. And so you're obviously hoping, if you're the Canucks, that as we've talked about in the past, that unlocks the best version of him on and off the ice.
Yeah, absolutely. I've talked a few times about Evander Kane. I think he's going to have a really good season for the Canucks. I think he is. It's going to be good. Okay. Quinn Hughes, do you want to get to this? Actually, do you have anything else you wanted to ask me about the Canucks skate at UBC? I don't really have much to say. Everybody looked great. Tolopilo? Okay, I did have this. Tolopilo has the most blue set. Actually, you know what? It is the most color you have seen on a set of Canucks hockey pads or goalie pads since Luongo's 2007-2008 blue and green Reebok setup.
Really?
You know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah, I do.
It looks like that. Like, I don't know if he's getting a new mask because his white mask looks a little weird with it, but he was rocking a blue setup. I can't believe I didn't get a picture. That's my bad. But yeah, he was rocking like an all blue and green setup. Like, there's no white on those pads. So
the Ian Clark days are done.
Yeah.
We saw Demko in all black last year.
Yeah.
Bring back the colored gear. I love colored goalie pads, so I'm all for it.
I buy into the Ian Clark line of thinking that you shouldn't give an outline. Big shocker to everyone. I buy into an Ian Clark line of thinking.
So I like the Demko black pads, right, for the black skate, but I'm not gonna lie, there's something clean about the white pads with the blue jerseys that I really like. Like, for me personally, absolutely. I didn't like the Luongo 07 colored pad look. As soon as he went to the white pads, I was like, that is so clean.
Yeah, exactly. I absolutely agree with you. I really like the white. It's it's clean. It's clean. Okay. That's all I had from the skate. There's going to be more. We're going to have more to talk about. Let's get to anyone else, which is a presentation of our friends at the Vancouver Canadians, who are back for their final 6-game homestand of the season. It's your last chance to see the Seas. There's a nooner at the Nat on Friday the 5th, fireworks on Saturday the 6th, and a family fun Sunday on September 7th to close out the regular season. The kids get to run the bases postgame. Always a fun time at the ballpark. For tickets, call 604-872-5232 or check out CanadiansBaseball.com. All right. The big thing I wanted to talk about in anyone else today is this interview that our pal Ian McIntyre, also just want to say this, got the pleasure of golfing with Ian McIntyre this offseason. Comes to no surprise to anyone, I'm sure. Just salt of the earth guy. Super, super great on the golf course. Way better golfer than me. But very encouraging and very just a gem to golf with. I'm not the best golfer. Got myself some new irons coming soon, so I'm excited about that. But yeah, just an absolute gem, Ian McIntyre. So I don't know where I was going with that. But yeah, Ian McIntyre wrote a story with Quinn Hughes. And the Canucks captain was obviously going to be asked about, are you staying? I think we talked about it yesterday. It gets talked about all the time. And basically what he had to say is that he hasn't made a decision one way or another. this was a quote that really stood out to me. And I'm not going to read all the quotes. Everybody should go read this article, sportsnet.ca. Like I said, our pal Ian McIntyre, who's got a hell of a shot. His approaches to the green, like, I cannot tell you how many green regulation that guy found. Anyways, this is one quote from Hughes that stuck out to me. He said, "One thing I'm really good at, or have gotten good at, is I'm very present. I can't even sign for another year, so there's nothing I can do. As far as the noise about his future, I can handle the noise. That's why I'm the captain of the team, because I can handle these things, and I can play at an elite level, and it doesn't matter what's going on around me. And as far as the noise around my teammates, I'm going to try to help everyone else too, and be as good a leader as I can be. Noise doesn't bother me. It's a long year, and I'm just going to be day to day and focus on the short term. That's the truth, honestly." And yeah, like I said, it stood out to me that he's so confident. Like, he's not like, "Oh, I'm going to try to keep the noise out." He's like, "No, I'm going to, and I know I can." I love that level of confidence from Quinn Hughes.
It's not just confidence, it's maturity. I mean, how many experiences has he been through in Vancouver? I mean, mostly related to the whole team and certain teammates, but over the years, he's been through a lot worse than this. And as he said, there's still another year after this one left on his contract. He isn't even eligible to start talking about a deal right now. And ultimately, this is what a lot of elite players go through. Leon dealt with the noise to some degree. McDavid's dealing with it right now. This is the territory when superstar players get closer to the end of their contracts. And again, he has the maturity to be able to handle it. No problem. That's why he's captain.
Yeah, absolutely. Did you take anything else away from that article?
Not really. I think
we were expecting him to speak glowingly about Adam Foote, right? Which is the other part of this article, right? Like, we knew that was gonna happen.
The other thing I was gonna say related to this whole idea of the noise and Quinn's future is, at least for him on a day-to-day basis, I'm sure he'll be asked about it once at the start of the season or at the start of training camp.
Yeah.
But at least in my experience, the Vancouver media pool doesn't constantly badger players about their contract status over and over again. Like, you might get asked about it once at the start of the season. And if you were, let's say, in your final year, which Quinn is not, then closer to the deadline, you might field some questions around that. But it's not going to be an every day, every week thing. The more annoying thing for Quinn might be actually dealing with when he goes to Toronto and now he's got to deal with the away team reporters, right? Because some of those guys are going to want to pry. And so when he goes to Toronto and he goes to Montreal, Boston, some of these other big markets, but dealing with it on a day-to-day basis in Vancouver, I don't think there's going to be a lot of noise. If anything, most of it comes from a lot of the national guys, to be honest. And I think that's what players in the locker room themselves know too. So that gives me sort of an extra sense of confidence. Not that I needed more confidence, but it just gives you another layer of, he's going to be fine. This is not going to affect him on the ice whatsoever.
He is going to get asked about it once. He's going to get it's you know what? And we don't even have to guess. It's going to be the exact same thing that happened to Bo Horvat. Bo Horvat talked about his contract once and then it was done. It didn't get brought up again. It really didn't. So yeah, again, I'm not worried about that part at all. Anything else on Hughes? The PD stuff was interesting. And again, people go read the article. Don't want to give it all away, but yeah, like, he's talking about PD being a really good player, talking about how he's PD's always been PD's biggest supporter, and of course, saying what we all know, that the Canucks need PD to get to that level.
Yeah, I mean, it's no secret. It's almost such an obvious storyline that we intentionally spend less, at least to this point, have tried our best not to talk about PD 24/7, right? As far as whenever we're going to talk about the keys to this team having success this season, that's just something we already assume. Him and then Demko staying healthy. If anything, the conversations are around some of the other X factors, what else needs to go right, what can't go wrong for this team to make the playoffs, because we know if he is not the game breaker that we're used to seeing, especially when you know how weak this team is down the middle at 2C and 3C, with all the uncertainty there, you know they're going to be cooked if he's not a point per game legit 1C.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I wanted to touch on this. This was an article written by Stéphane Roger today at Canucks Army. It's titled, "The New CBA Rollout Gives the Canucks Two Major Advantages in Extending Quinn Hughes." Like I said, we're going to talk more about the CBA. This was reported by Frank Saravalli yesterday. We're going to talk more about it with Hart later in the show. But we're talking about the Canucks specifically and what it means for Quinn Hughes. Basically, the short of it is, the first thing is that the Canucks are going to be able to sign him to an 8-year contract, and he could be one of the final players if he wants to sign long-term. He could be one of the final players, I don't want to say in NHL history, but at least until the next CBA is negotiated. Maybe they go for 8 years again, but he could be one of the final players until at least 2030 to sign an 8-year contract. Like he could be, because they're going to lose that ability as soon as the CBA comes into effect next year.
Yes, but it's only an advantage if he wants an 8-year deal.
Exactly.
And that's where I'm curious, and Hart mentioned this in his interview as well. Are we going to see star players start to take more medium-term contract extensions? Austin Matthews did that on his last contract. Not all players are obviously going down that route. Leon wanted the max term deal. But we also saw Evan Bouchard on his most recent contract. He went for more of a medium-term deal to give himself flexibility, to make sure he could give himself an opportunity to cash in again. And even with Connor McDavid, there's been a lot of speculation that his next deal might not be 8 years, that it might be 3, 4. We'll see what ultimately ends up happening with McDavid. But the point being, if you're a superstar like McDavid, like Quinn Hughes, a medium-term deal has two advantages in the sense that, A, it gives you the flexibility of not being locked into one team when you know you're in the prime of your career, and you want to know that your organization, you want to know that whatever team you're on has the absolute best shot at winning a Stanley Cup. So that gives you more flexibility to sort of test drive and see, all right, do I feel that if you're Connor McDavid, I have the best shot of winning a Stanley Cup in Edmonton? If I'm Quinn Hughes, do I feel like there's a realistic cup window happening in Vancouver? It gives yourself a little bit more flexibility to reassess that, 3 or 4 years down the road. And then the second one is obviously from a financial perspective, the cap is skyrocketing. It gives you an opportunity to maximize your earnings. Now, what you're sacrificing is guaranteed money. But if you're a superstar of McDavid or Hughes' caliber, you're going to bank on your ability all day long, I think. And so I'm really curious to see, not just with Quinn, but even with McDavid, I wonder if we're going to start to see more medium-term deals.
Yeah, that's an interesting kind of way to think about it, because the one that stands out, like you said, Evan Bouchard, very, very recent. I did want to say this as well. This was the second thing in Stéphane's article, which I found really interesting, and I actually didn't know this, but he was pulling up where'd it go? Yeah. Yes. Article 16 of the tax treaty between Canada and the United States. Signing bonuses for artists and athletes count as inducements to sign, not income. Then that means they're taxed at a reduced flat rate of 15%. Whereas obviously the top federal income tax bracket is 33%. Like, that's millions of dollars. So it's a little bit of an advantage for the Canucks that they could do some different signing bonus structures, because that's the other part of the new CBA. All signing bonuses are capped at 60% of the value of a player's contract. So it's another lesser talked about one. I don't quite understand it, to be completely honest with you, but Stéphane does a really good job of breaking it down. So I just want to make sure I mention both of those. You can go read more about it at CanucksArmy.com. But yeah, some interesting stuff with the CBA and how.
And I will mention, we got into tax rates and stuff with Hart as well. I wish I had brought that part up with him, because that would have been interesting to hear his take on it. But yes, we get into everything and anything you could imagine regarding CBA and salary cap with Hart Levine.
Okay. Let's get to the interview with Hart Levine. It is brought to you by our friends at Greta. By now, you know that Greta is a great spot to watch the big game, but did you know it's an even better spot for your upcoming party or event? If you need a venue for a team building or summer social event, check out Greta. They've got the street food menu, they've got the arcade, and of course, they've got the bar. It's always a fun time with plenty of options. Make Greta your spot for your next event. For more info and to book your event, go to gretabar.com. Greta Bar YVR, 50 West Cordova Street is the address. Let the games begin. Let's get to this interview, Jacob. Let's do it.
All right. Thanks, Quads. And I appreciate the opportunity here to host this interview with Hart Levine of PuckPedia. Hart, thank you so much for coming on to the show today. Why don't you introduce yourself and kind of explain your role with PuckPedia, how it came to be, and then what really led you to grow it into what it's become.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks so much for having me on. I actually had the idea for it in 2017. So it seems like a long time ago now. At the time, there were some cap sites out there, but I found like I was the person in my friend group and colleagues that they were always going to and asking questions, and I'd refer them out to other sites, and they found them kind of intimidating, and just they didn't feel comfortable like looking up information. And to be a fan in the salary cap era, you do need to know the team's cap situation and players' contracts. It's not just enough to sit around and argue what players better. You need to know what they make and how much cap space they're eating up. So that was part of it, is just thinking. I thought that there should be a site that was a little more inviting to a casual fan. I also found I was often flipping between a lot of other places, like places to find advanced information, the latest injury news, and other places to have the more interactive tools. So I thought there should be a place where it was all together. And then the third was, not just a place where you could look up information, but actually like engage and use it in an interactive way. And that's really been one of the things as we've added features over the years, is everyone thinks that they're smarter than their team's GM. That's kind of like my main philosophy for the site. So like, let's give people the tools that a GM has. Let's give them roster tools to put rosters together. We have draft pick value calculators and things like that. Let's give people like the same things that a GM has, so that they can really feel like they're in that chair. So yeah, it's launched in 2018. It's been a long road. I know a lot of people are just coming across us over the last year or so, but I've been at it, grinding away for a long time, and it's great to have more people checking us out lately.
Well, first of all, Hart, as a writer, I owe you a huge thank you for having a resource this valuable. I don't know how many cap-related articles I've done, not just surrounding the Canucks, but for the whole league, and to have all that information there, especially once Cap Friendly got scooped up. PuckPedia is a godsend. So first of all, thank you. Now, the reason we're so excited to have you on today is because there are, of course, some CBA changes that are being implemented, not just for the 2026-27 season, but are going to take into effect immediately for this season. The most notable of them is the new playoff cap system. Can you, as simply as possible, break down how that cap system will work?
Yeah, doing it as simply as possible is hard, but I'll do my best. So the playoff cap system obviously is brand new. It's for just the 20 players that are dressed in the playoff game. So in the regular season, injured players, the scratches, everyone counts against the cap. The playoff cap, it's only the dressed players, and the cap is only for the game. It's not like in the regular season you have to be cap compliant, every day. The playoff cap is just for your game. It's the same salary cap as for the season. So this year it's 95.5 million. And it's, like I said, just the 20 players that are dressed. It includes all the dead cap charges that you have for the year. So all the buyouts, retentions, bonus overages. Also includes if you had someone buried in the minors for the year, that charge all counts in your playoff cap number. The one kind of difference from the regular season, though, which is going to have a big impact, is in the regular season, if you acquire a player partway through the season, they only are charged to the team for the portion of the season remaining. So that's why teams, we call it accruing cap space. They basically build up cap space because cap space is more valuable at the trade deadline. At the trade deadline, there's only just over 20% of the season remaining. So you only need to have enough space to accommodate 20% of a player's cap hit. So if it's a $10 million player, at the deadline, you only need to fit 2 million of them in your cap. However, in the playoff cap, there is no prorating or adjusting for when a player was acquired. It's their full annual cap hit. So that $10 million player, even though he only was charged for 2 million to that team during the regular season, they need to fit his whole 10 million in the playoff cap. So that's potentially going to lead to some, maybe a little less trade activity at the deadline, because while you may be able to fit a player at the deadline by accruing space, now you might not be able to fit them in your 20-man playoff lineup.
What's so interesting you bring that up, because between that and also another couple of changes coming into effect this season are going to be no more paper transactions. So you look at what a team like the Canucks, and they're far from the only club that does this, but because their AHL affiliate is so close in Abbotsford, what would happen is on off days, they would send down, if let's say Archie Baines was up and had been recalled, they would send him back down on an off day as a paper transaction to Abbotsford. And then because, cap space accrues daily, you pick up a little bit of that cap. And we remember the Canucks did that really consistently this past season, and by the deadline it made a significant difference in terms of how much cap space they actually had available. Between that no longer being available, the new playoff cap system, and no more double retention trades at the deadline, or at least restrictions on the timeline of that, it seems to me, the way I'm interpreting it is, if you're a team that's tight up against the cap at the start of the season, it's going to be way harder to carve out cap space to make in-season trades compared to years past. And I think about, maybe that impacting the Canucks and, their rumored interest or not in Jack Roslovic. Overall, though, is that a fair way to read it, where the cap space you have at the start of the season matters more than it did in years past?
I think that's an excellent way to sum it up. And with some of these rules that when they first came out, I was talking to people like, who wanted this? Like, who wanted the restriction on double retentions and some of the other elements? And, in talking to people with teams and agents, it sounds like the NHL did feel that, double retentions, using LTIR the way it was being used, it was sort of like against the spirit of the salary cap. And they wanted teams to have a roster at the start of the season that was cap compliant, and not being able to use all these like maneuvers to really build up the roster. So in that sense, I think it's probably mission accomplished. Like, I do think we'll see less trade activity as a result. I think like teams close to the cap, you could still accrue a little bit. You could still trade for a player at the deadline. And because you're only counting 20 players in your playoff cap instead of 23 or 25, including injured players, I like, you can make all that work. But it definitely reduces, I would think it's going to reduce the number of trades. It's going to reduce the number of trades that involve really high cap hits at the deadline. So in terms of like making it so teams are sort of closer stuck to their original cap hit for the season, I think that's mission accomplished. But I think the other unintended consequence potentially is just way less trade activity. And I don't know how that's good for anybody. I think that, shows like yours and the writing that you do, a lot of it is fueled by trade speculation, then evaluating trades. I just, not sure how that's good for the game to have less trade activity. But I would think, that you could just look at these rules and it would be very reasonable to conclude that there will be less trade activity as a result.
And to add to that, the other dynamic that has affected, trade and free agent activity is the spike of the salary cap, where it feels like a lot of teams, like the Florida Panthers, for example, that otherwise would have lost, let's say, a Brad Marchand or an Aaron Ekblad to free agency, because the cap went up a ton. They had actually the cap space to keep their guys, and not just them, but the Stars were able to keep most of the key guys that they wanted this offseason. And so between there being more restrictions around carving out cap flexibility and the potential for less in-season trades, and also the spike in the salary cap, making it easier for teams in the offseason to keep their good players, do you worry that not just mid-season, but that overall that there could be a pretty notable slowdown in overall sort of player transaction activity from team to team?
I think those are great points that you raise, and it definitely, those are all factors that would suggest harder to make trades and more likely to re-sign players. I think the one hopefully counter to that, which maybe will help transactions, is I do think we'll see a shift to shorter contracts for players. We've already seen some of it. I know the term limits are going to go in place, not for next summer, but next fall. But obviously that takes a long time to work its way through if players are signing for 6 years instead of 7. But I think aside from those limits, though, we're seeing players signing for shorter terms. Like you look at like Evan Bouchard, for example, with Edmonton. In the past, that's an automatic like 8-year deal. But now I think because the cap is going up so much, that 4-year deal makes a lot of sense for a player, because why should I give up the prime earning years when the cap could be significantly higher? So I think hopefully the shorter contracts that we're seeing could counteract some of that and have some more players moving in free agency, or maybe that means more pending UFAs that move in trades. But I agree with your points that all those factors you laid out would all like suggest less player movement.
So a question from me, Hart, and this is something that I know a lot of fans think about. It's been in the discourse around the league a lot. Taxes in different markets in the NHL. Huge discussion. We've heard Gary Bettman say it doesn't matter. We know that it does matter. We've seen players talk about it mattering. I'm curious what your thoughts are. Just that, it doesn't really seem to be an issue that's going to be addressed in the CBA, at least anytime soon, but also like, what are other ways that players are thinking about taxes, salaries, and how that's going to impact? We just talked about maybe we won't see as many players traded. Free agency might slow down as far as signing shorter contracts. But, are you going to see players maybe more hesitant to sign in high tax cities? Are you going to see players maybe willing to sign in those cities if there's other opportunities, endorsements? Obviously, a market like Vancouver or Toronto is going to offer a lot more potential earning for these players than, say, a market like, I don't know, Utah, right? Like there's differences in all these different markets. I'm curious what your thoughts are from a player perspective, and then what we're going to see in the long term when it comes to the CBA, if this whole tax in different markets issue becomes an actual issue.
I think like most things, like there's some truth that it obviously is an impact. It's a factor, but I think it's overblown. Like you look at a market like Vancouver. Yes, it's a much higher tax rate than someone playing in Florida. But let's also keep in mind the player is earning US dollars and living in Canadian dollars. So their money goes a lot further where they're living. So like everything, there's trade-offs, there's pros and cons. You also brought up endorsements. That's very true too. Yeah. So can we say that it is not a factor? Of course not, because we see players sign in Vegas and Florida for less money. I think and Nashville in the past as well. I think in combination because they're good teams and they're good places to live, but obviously the taxes are a factor. And same with Dallas as well. The taxes are obviously a factor, but I don't think it's like the only factor. And again, there's other components. I think teams potentially like where it's Canadian dollars that they spend their money. I think those are all factors too. Look, there's others. Every other North American sport, they have plenty of teams that are in high tax states. They have like teams in New York and California, and they have teams in Florida, in Tennessee. And you don't hear about it in these other sports at all, or nearly as much. I think a large reason for that is just the teams in the low tax states have been winning more lately, but for a long time they weren't winning. I don't think this would ever get addressed in the CBA because you would need enough teams to agree to it, and I just don't think that teams would want something like that. And I think that for players, why would they want to potentially like limit players' freedom to move between or to pick a destination where there's like lower tax if that's something they value? So I don't think it would get addressed in a CBA. I do think it's a factor, but I think how much of an impact it has is overblown. And it's a little bit of a loser's lament of teams that aren't winning and are in higher tax places. And it's just like something to point to.
Is there an overlooked change in the new CBA that you think will have more of an impact on the league than people realize?
Oh, that's a good question. Wow. Let me flip through my list of changes. I think that you brought up the paper loans. I think that has a small impact. Like they have to play a game in the minors, so that reduces a little bit of how much space can be accrued. One thing that's interesting is the roster emergency exceptions. So that's where in the previous CBA, if teams were short players, they didn't have enough cap space to call up a healthy player, they would play short for one game, and then they could call up a player who made just over the league minimum, and they could add him to the roster, and he would not carry a cap hit until they had enough healthy players. Again, back to like what we think the spirit of these changes is to limit these sort of like loopholes. Well, they changed the rule. They actually allowed it so you can call up a higher price player. It's now the league minimum plus 375, so you could call up a higher player. But the difference now is it's sort of like not for free. Now it uses up all your available cap space to call that player up, and how the amount of cap space you didn't have for that player gets charged to the following season as an overage, so reduces your cap space for next season. So in one way, it's a little more flexible. You can call up a little bit of a higher price guy, but for the most part, it's more punitive, and it does not really allow a team to kind of get away with playing a bit short and still building up a little cap space or not having any consequences for the following season. So that's another one where, like, to your point at the beginning, I think teams, they're kind of like have their roster to start with and their cap space, and they need to be able to have enough space to handle injuries and things like that, and maybe not make as many additions, because again, that's another thing that I think is a bit more punitive. So that's one. I think definitely like how long teams have players' rights. I think, it's been talked about, but just like unifying it makes the most sense. It's like we've been tracking players that are college grad or went to college, and when their rights expired, some of them should have been August 15th, but it's very complicated because it's based on when they file graduation paperwork or file paperwork with their transcripts to say they left school. So it's not like automatic. Now we have all these players switching between CHL to NCAA, and we're going to have players switching back, I'm sure, from NCAA to CHL. It makes it very complicated to track when players' rights expire. Agents are asking me all the time when their guys' rights expire. Teams are asking my opinion. That obviously that's not a good system if it's that hard. So I think unifying that and basically getting to the same spot where it's like 3 to 4 years, depending on what age you're drafted, I think that makes a lot of sense as well.
We're, of course, entering a new era where the salary cap is spiking, and it's only the beginning, right? This is season 1, and some of the effects are only going to become more pronounced as cap grows to well over $100 million. How do you think the spike over the next couple of seasons is going to change the dynamic of the league, whether it's related to contracts, trade market, or just the overall meta in the blueprint for building winning teams?
It definitely has an impact. As I mentioned earlier, I think it's short, like players will want shorter term contracts. I think the players where that makes a lot of sense for are ones that are either like more established, closer to UFA eligibility. They want to, like, instead of signing in the early 20s for 8 years and getting to free agency like in the early 30s, they're going to maybe get like 2 deals done and then be a free agent by like 29 or 30. So I think that is a dynamic. I think from a team perspective, though, is they're going to want to lock up young players, or especially good players, as long as possible. I think they're going to be willing to make more bets. And like what I just mentioned, though, like the player's incentive is to take shorter. How do you get the player to go for it? I think it's younger players with very little experience getting long-term contracts. That's the benefit. We saw like Jackson Blake just sign a long deal, Frank Nazar in Chicago after less than a full season, right? So that's the kind of guy. In the past, you'd probably say, like, have him play out his next season, or he's not a guy we're ready yet to commit to 8 years at such big money to. But that's the kind of guy then that might be more willing to kind of take that risk of not going back to the market so soon, because they haven't really proven anything yet anyway. So let's take this big money. And because they're so young, they will get back to the market in their late 20s. So I think that's a little bit of the dynamic, is teams are really going to want to get guys signed to long-term deals, especially if they're younger, knowing that every year you wait to get a guy locked up, the cap is going to be so much higher, and it's just going to create a higher cost. So that'll be an interesting dynamic to watch.
So just to build off of that, this is my last question, and then we'll let you go, Hart. Of these young players, we've seen a lot sign these long-term deals, in the last year or so. Which one do you think is going to age the best as the cap changes, as the way that teams and players look at these long-term contracts change? Which young guy right now who's locked up for 7-8 years are you going to look at when those contracts end and say, man, that team got an absolute steal by signing him when they did? Sorry to put you on the spot if there's none.
I'm just pulling up my list of signings. That's a good one. I think that like that Jackson Blake one's interesting. Just at that cap number of 5.1 million, like that's not it. That has very low risk to me if he doesn't work out. Also, we should mention another reason to sign younger guys to these long-term deals is until they're 26, if you can buy them out, it's only a third. So instead of 2/3 for an older player. So obviously you don't want to be buying out a player, but it's like the risk is just much lower. So I think that Jackson Blake bet is pretty interesting. I'm looking like Logan Stankoven. I think, again, he hasn't proven a ton, but he's because he doesn't have that many games, but he's shown flashes, and I think he looked like a good fit. And at 22 years old, at $6 million, I think that's going to age pretty well as well. So those would be a couple that I kind of point to. I think the thing for people to keep in mind, we're so used to a flat cap environment, but now we kind of have like massive inflation, right? So like 6 million cap it today is worth like 8 or 9 in a couple of years. And so some of these numbers seem big, like Frank Nazar at 6.6 seemed a lot for a guy with 50 games. But I think in a couple of years, 6.6 is going to be like 8 million or 9 million. And even if he's like a second line player and not a star, like that's not going to feel like too bad of a deal. So those are a couple that stick out.
Hart, thank you so much for coming on today. We appreciate it. We'll have you back on again for sure at some point. Your insight is unparalleled. So we appreciate everything. And, thank you for what you do at PuckPedia. It's a huge help for all of us in the business. And again, thanks for coming.
Thanks so much for having me on. Really enjoyed it. Appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, Hart. All right, Harm. No quads. So you and I are here to wrap up the show today. And that means we got to get into a Bet365 bet of the day. Do you have anything lined up?
I mean, there's no hockey on. So what, are we just picking for baseball?
Yeah. I mean, if you need some help with a
guy.
baseball bet, I can probably come up with a baseball bet. First off, while I look for a baseball bet, Hart was great. Just absolutely awesome insight. What stands out for you from the discussion we just had and just the cap situation and the CBA situation in general?
Yeah, I mean, how many of those little rule changes are going to make it significantly tougher for teams to grow the cap space that they have at the start of the season to make in-season trades? That's that's one of my most interesting takeaways, between the paper transactions, the new playoff cap system. And yes, that only applies to the 20 players that you're actually dressing for a playoff game. But the part about it being where if you're acquiring a $10 million player, it's their whole AAV as opposed to the 20% portion that would typically be remaining. That's pretty substantial, and no double retention trades at the deadline either. I think it helps us understand, like we were having the conversation yesterday regarding Jack Roslovic, and would signing him inhibit the Canucks' ability to go out and potentially acquire a bigger fish, like actually legit top 6 centerman in the middle of the season. I think especially now that we know that some of these rule changes are going to take effect this season, that the answer to that is, yeah, it could inhibit. And if anything, it strengthens the case for why the Canucks should take a patient approach and maybe not take the Roslovic bait.
Absolutely. All right. I've got a Bet365 bet of the day. The Blue Jays taking on the Cincinnati Reds, and Shane Bieber, he was just on a 6-inning stretch, which for those of you who don't know, Nation Network show that I'm the producer for. Great interview. So if you haven't seen it, definitely go check it out. But Shane Bieber on the mound for the Blue Jays. High scoring game yesterday. Both teams putting up a ton of runs. I believe the final score was 11-9 or 12-9 for the Blue Jays. So I'm going to take the under. You can take under 8.5 runs at plus 105. I think Bieber is going to shut down the Reds. Zach Littell is pitching for Cincinnati. A solid pitcher, but he's the kind of guy that the Jays sometimes just struggle with, right? You're lower in the rotation guys. Every once in a while, the Jays offense will have a slow day against one of those types of pitchers. I'm looking at like a 5-2 final for Toronto, 4-2 final. Take the under, plus 105 for the Toronto Blue Jays at the Cincinnati Reds. And you can get that at Bet365. Whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. Download the app and use code NATION when you sign up. All right, Harm. Well, it's been a pleasure for myself to co-host with you for the second half of this show. I think you're off now. Are you on tomorrow's show?
No, I'm on tomorrow.
You're on tomorrow. I'm off tomorrow. I'm heading to Calgary for a wedding, and then Harmon is going to be off on the weekend as well. So I don't know what the plan is for Friday, but won't be Harm, won't be myself. So just pay attention to what Quad says tomorrow. He'll have the whole rundown for you. And then we're getting close to training camp, Harm. Looking forward to that. All right. Well, if there's nothing else from you, we'll wrap up the show. Thank you to everyone for listening. This has been another edition of Canucks Conversation.
Canucks Conversation is live Monday through Friday, every weekday at 2 p.m. over on the Canucks Army YouTube channel. Make sure you like, subscribe, and interact in the YouTube live chat every day with us, folks.